Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the last session of the third day of the Turn It Up Virtual Community Engagement Conference. My name is Denise Francisco. I'm an associate at Kapia Consulting Group. And so welcome. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands we're joining from today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be participating. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Australia. I'd like to acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. For my session today, I'm going to be guiding you through the journey of the Kurunjang Community Project. This session shares the experiences of myself as the facilitator and community members Lorraine Jones and Jess Munro, who together with a core group of people from the Kurunjang community, embarked on a journey over 8 months to address public safety through a facilitated community-led initiative. The aim of the Kurunjang Community Project was to come together and to identify and develop projects that would make Kuranjang a better place to live. It was to build on the strengths of the local communities and increase community safety. In this session, you'll hear about how this group transitioned from sharing a meal and games for the kids at the local Kurunjang Community Centre to then having to transition to meeting in an online environment, and they chose to meet in a Facebook Messenger group, a Facebook Messenger room. And of course, that's because of the coronavirus, COVID-19. You'll hear reflections from the participants about their expectations, what worked well throughout the process, and some of the challenges that they experienced. So what I've done is I've pre-recorded the discussions with the two participants prior to the session today. And so I'm going to share some of their reflections at different stages throughout this presentation. So a little bit more about the project. The Victorian Government funded the community-led project in Kuranjang over about 5 months. It was supported by representatives of the Community Crime Prevention Unit of the Department of Justice and Community Safety and staff from the Community Wellbeing Unit at Melton City Council. And Kapia Consulting Group were engaged to facilitate the process and to design and deliver a community engagement approach with the community of Kuranjang. So we started off the project by getting to know each other. Kapia hosted an end-of-year block party at the Kuranjang Community Hub, and that was to bring members of the community together, and it invited everyone to suggest some ideas for a shared community goal and whether or not people were interested in being involved in the Kuranjang Community Project. So I'm just going to share some reflections from some of the participants. Just bear with me for a second whilst I open up a video to share.
Thanks very much, Lorraine and Jess, for sharing your reflections about the Kurunjang Community Project. Maybe we'll start with telling us a little bit about yourself. What was your situation? And tell us a little bit about your relationship with the Kurunjang community. What did you think this project was going to be about? Maybe I'll start with you, Lorraine.
Okay, well, I'd moved from New Zealand in 2004, and about 2006 I moved to Melton, where I lived. I didn't know anybody here, and I was working pretty much full time, really exhausted, and so that did preclude me meeting up with people. And I did find that, unlike what I was used to, people were much more hesitant to engage. I sometimes felt like like that woman that people back away from at her party. So she's talking to us. Why is she talking to us? Do you know her? I don't know her. She's talking to us. Thinking, oh, so I'd sort of given up. And of course I was past the school thing. I didn't participate in any of those things. And so I'd just been here doing my thing. I had seen a flyer going around saying they were going to do a hub, and it had gone. And so when I came home one night and found there was a flyer in the thing in the letterbox, and I looked at it and I thought, oh, they've done it. Oh, that's interesting, because I never went up that end of the street, because there was always sort of school traffic and stuff. And it was a lovely day, and they said food. And I thought, oh, look, I'll go down and see what it's done, because I used to always use community centres a lot. You know, I thought, oh, they might have some good courses and stuff coming up. I'll go and see what they're doing. So I went, you know, really in sublime ignorance, and rocked up just to see what was going on. And so when I got there, I said, oh, yep. And you had someone saying, oh, look, and put your ideas here and this and that. I'm thinking, ideas about what? But anyway, we had a little look around and sort of nosied around, and ended up chatting to one of the people there. And once I started, and I thought, oh, that was nice, for me anyway, as they edged away from me, and sort of went the rounds, filled in the boxes. So I just thought, oh, well, that was interesting. And I think at some point someone said, we're having a follow-on meeting. Are you interested? And they'll send you a thing. And I wasn't sure if I was, but I just thought, well, it'd be good to know what they're going to have, because if it's got some worthwhile stuff and it's just down the road, hey, that'll be great. And so that's what sort of lured me in and got me connected in the first place. And I thought I might even meet some of the local people, and it would be wonderful to know someone who lives here besides me.
Thanks, Lorraine. So it was about the community hub and the interest in this new community centre that was kind of part of the draw card. Jess, what about you? What was your situation, and what was your expectation about what it was all going to be about?
Gosh, so we moved to Melton, it's 2 years ago now. So when we moved here, we didn't know anyone. And really, although we attended a couple of different play groups in Kuranjang, I couldn't say I really knew many people other than my immediate neighbours. So I've been a stay-at-home mum for several years with my two boys. And I wouldn't say I felt connected at all, to be honest with you, with my community. However, we were actually using the community hub prior to the block party because we did a play group there. So we were very keen on going to the block party because we are those families who attend everything. And so we went, but I'm going to be honest and say I was so oblivious. I thought it was held by the council and I had no idea what anyone was talking about. I ate the food, had a great time. I didn't sign up to be a returner. But I had a great time, and I kind of thought when I left, well, that's the end of that.
So if you didn't sign up, how was it that you got to be involved at that next meeting following the block party?
Well, this sells me in a really great light, but my neighbour did, and at one of our play groups we attend, she said, they're having a meeting at the community hub and kids can come and there's also food. And I said, sure, yeah, I'll be a +1. So I ended up going. Not a clue what it was going to be about. Actually thought it was maybe about neighbourhood watch, and I thought this is fantastic. I can talk about my own street. So yeah, kind of oblivious until really the first meeting actually.
That's great. And so it was somebody inviting you to come along that was kind of the first impetus.
So the next part of the project or the process was breaking bread. We shared our first meal, and Kapir outlined the background of the project to the group and shared some of the ideas that had been generated at the block party. And the group considered how to recruit more members, and they started a Facebook group.
So I'll go to Jess. First of all, this time, tell us a little bit about your reflections of what worked well and what were the challenges at that first meeting when we were breaking bread. Over to you, Jess.
Well, I really had no idea what I was walking into at that point, literally no idea. I was thrilled that I could take my 4-year-old and he had an absolute wild time, probably little bit too wild, but still fairly wild. I guess I actually found a little bit overwhelming, as there was kind of a bit where we all introduced each other to the group, and we were all around a very large table, and everyone went round explaining their reasons for being there, and, you know, a bit of a description. And I was lucky last, and every single person came in with, oh, I've recently qualified as this, or I work for the council, or I'm part of this group. And I thought, oh my days, what on earth have I joined? And I had to say, I'm Jess, I'm a stay-at-home mum, and felt like a bit of an idiot, to be honest with you. But at the same time, by the end of that session, you know, it was very clear that I actually used that community hub, and some of the people in that room probably not quite as frequent members of the community hub. So, you know, by that kind of gave me a little bit of confidence in being there. But it was an interesting session. I guess one thing that didn't work quite as well for me is that some of the language did kind of go over my head a little bit. So like, a lot of the ideas that were going around were interesting, and there was a few people there who I definitely connected with, and it was really interesting to hear their stories and what they were already doing in the community. But I will admit that a few things did go over my head there.
No worries. So it's the clarity of language is something that needs to be pretty straightforward at the beginning.
Yeah, a bit of clarity of language, but also I guess some of the bigger picture scenarios that we were talking about were great, but I didn't necessarily see at the time the links that they had with actually getting stuff going.
Fair enough. Thank you very much, Jess. Over to you, Lorraine. At that first meeting, what are your reflections of what worked well, and what did you say were some of the challenges?
Well, I thought the idea was food was great because, one, it was something to eat, and it seemed to me, given so many people work, both people work, it was an opportunity. It meant they could come from home, grab the kids, rock up, whereas without it, it would have been a barrier. Right on tea time, no, I've got to feed the kids. So I thought, well, okay, it's getting a lot more people here, and you've got a much better demographic, because at least with the food you could talk a bit. Because for me, it's like, I sort of wanted to get a little bit of a feel for the people. I thought, if this whole thing is about encouraging community engagement, to me that meant getting to know people. And I thought, if you're going to be part of a project, you know, getting a feel for people, building a bit of trust, knowing where people come from, what they might bring. And also I'm thinking, who's in my neighbourhood? You know, maybe one of these people will have something in common. But it was a little bit difficult to do that. But I think one of the, and it was all right while we were just eating. And then when we moved into sort of like the business part of it, then it became clear to me, at least, that if you're going to talk, if it's going to then become the adult part of the business, someone needs to take the kids away and actually look after them elsewhere. Because as soon as their mums were there, and usually it was their mum because they were the main care provider, as soon as their mums were there, those kids were in and out. The noise was extraordinary if you were trying to concentrate. And the mothers were constantly distracted, even when their dads were there. And I must admit, I was aware of the voice in the back of my head saying, glaring at the men and thinking, excuse me, but they're your children too. Like, why are you leaving it to your wife? You're not the only person here that's important. Support her. Thinking, shush. But, you know, you're making little commentaries. You're noticing things anyway. And I guess having been a single woman, raising a child on my own and working in professional environments most of my life, I was sort of attuned to all the ways women get disempowered, you know, often through motherhood. Or, Jess, you said, I felt I was only a mother at home. And so I thought, we need to make room for them to step back into their full womanhood. That was the one thing that I brought out is, yeah, if you're going to do this in future, have a little program for them, have someone out there. If the council can provide someone, that's fantastic. Make them happy, but let the people engage. Otherwise, we're going to lose people. And going around was a good idea. It gave you a little bit of a sense, but it is awkward at the beginning. You're just feeling a bit uncomfortable. Will I fit in? What are they actually doing here again? So it was just having to trust the process Yeah, but that takes trust and that takes relationship and that takes time.
Yeah.
Setting it up to allow those things to happen.
And it was interesting because I know you wanted me to share some of the reflections from the facilitator's point of view. It was, and we've discussed this, it's quite challenging, isn't it, whilst allowing the kids to be there meant that mums could actually participate and have them there in the room. But it was also quite challenging too to keep people kind of focused and be able to follow where we're at and what was happening. So I'll go to Jen.
So we moved to the next stage of the project where the membership grew and the group reflected on possible ideas for the project, and they decided they needed more information to make a decision about which ideas to progress. The group decided on 2 goals. One was to provide an active and relaxing outdoor space for any age to come together that is easily accessible to the whole of Kuranjang. And the other was to improve accessibility, connectivity and thoroughfares throughout Kuranjang to enable better access to local services and facilities.
So we got to that part of the process where we needed to generate ideas and agree on what we wanted the group to focus on. So Lorraine, what were your reflections of that part of the process?
One of the things that had been increasingly that I'd noticed and was increasingly aware of was I thought either this is a group of raging introverts or they're all too scared to say anything. And I thought, what do you do about this? This is a challenge in a group. And I thought, well, I'm not prepared to let this opportunity go. And maybe if I start speaking, one, I can ask the questions that I want to ask. And hopefully that will prompt people maybe to then ask, or at least realise that the answer to that was useful and it might prompt them to engage more. But for quite a while, I felt like I was the only one that was asking the questions. So I thought, well, if it's what you've got to do, it's what you've got to do. This opportunity is too good to miss. So I ploughed on. But it was really interesting, though, to observe in the group that the thing that most fired people up, that most energised people, was getting the thrice lane connection through. People have been fighting for that for 25 years and been fobbed off by council all the time. They were really fed up with that and frustrated about why not, when clearly it was clear that the original plan had been for it to go through and they just stopped like 20 feet short of a middle bit. So that's where the energy was. And there wasn't too much interest in the other because it's like, yeah, we'll do that later. So trying to get people to focus on what they could do and introduce the idea that maybe that was the lane through way was going to be outside the scope, I imagine was quite tricky for you, Denise, as facilitator, given that most of the people seem to be there for that. But as we did move away and start talking about possibilities for engagement, and the idea of Little Brine Creek came up, I can't remember quite how that arose, but I was really surprised for myself to find how engaged I actually got. And to my surprise, who'd never really ever thought of myself as a person in community engagement and all this sort of stuff, my mind was just bursting with ideas. And it was like they were coming out, boom, 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 oh, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. And I was, at the same time, I was finding, I was surprising myself, and that would connect to that, and that would connect to that. If we do that, we can get that engaged. And suddenly my mind was bursting of ways how we could engage, potential funding, where we could get more in, how we could pull it all together. We could join the hub, we could do this, we could do the other. And I thought, whoa, where's this coming from? It's like 10 years out in the sticks living on my own. I've got a wellspring of stuff in there I didn't know. So it was interesting for me as a person, but also watching the actual process.
It was interesting at that time. It was still, people were still a bit unsure. So, what did you think at that time was needed to get people to, think more broadly about the possibilities?
Well, I could see there was the dilemma, like everybody, including myself, the number one priority was that lane. Really wanted that. And to be diverted from that when you supposedly have an opportunity, what does the community want? The community always says, we want this. After 25 years of being told, no. You know, to be diverted, it's like, so what is this? You know, are we actually involved in this? Do they actually want to know what we think? Or are we just going to become the rubber stamp for what they want to do, which is how council had been perceived before. It's like it didn't matter what the community wanted, they'd just do what they did. And so it did start to raise a few questions about the authenticity of the process, the genuineness of it. I didn't really, you know, I was beginning to get a little bit distrustful of the process. But I thought, we've got to wait and see. Got to wait and see.
What about you, Jess? What are your reflections of that early stages of just generating ideas and deciding what to do, what to focus on?
Okay, so again, this doesn't really sell me. But at this point, I remember thinking, still don't really know what this is about. Not entirely convinced that I'm going to carry on with this one. But look, the food last time was good. Let's give this one another whirl. And then very quickly, it became a very large group of people talking non-stop about a road. And controversially, and this cannot get out, I don't care about the road. So I was thinking, do you know what? This may not be a goer for me if everyone's just going to talk about a road. So at that point, I probably wasn't overly invested. However, there were the odd whisper about, you know, what we could do along the creek. And I'm thinking, fantastic, we might get a free bench, a free swing, something out of this. So that was really what I was clinging on to at that point.
Great, thanks so much. I think in the end, the advocacy piece had something that had been long-standing, and that council, in terms of their support for the project as well as the state government, weren't probably in a position to be able to proactively advocate on behalf of that issue. And so from a facilitation point of view, we presented an opportunity that was, let's think of some ideas of things that within the 5-month period of time that we had, that people could actually influence within that time frame. So it was interesting. You described it as being diverted, but in fact there were some choices there that people needed to make. And ultimately, I think people decided on the same thing, to focus on that piece of land right near the creek that was unloved and had potential. So yeah, it was interesting how that
I think
took
once
place.
it became clear that it wasn't going to be possible to do the other, at that point people were willing to move to, okay, well, we'll do this other project in terms of let's get something done. If as a community we can achieve something successfully as a first step, then we'll have the confidence, people will have more confidence in us, and perhaps as a group we can move to another step, which may in fact be, let's get that nice lane. Or there can be a subgroup that goes and deals with that because they can see that there is some will. It took me a while to work out, like down the track, a number of meetings, to work out that maybe this had been prompted by the possibility of a grant from the state government, and that the council had to liaise but take their lead supposedly from us, so their hands were a bit tied, and you were there employed by the department to facilitate. But it took a while for that to become clear to me, and so there was a lot of hesitation and a bit of distrust until that became really clear.
So we got to that part of
So, stage 3 COVID-19 restrictions were enforced and the membership of the group shifted. And we transitioned to a core group then meeting online. We had others that were following progress of the group via the Facebook page. The group discussed how they could continue. Could they continue on in an online or virtual environment? And we provided individual support to people as required.
So the group did need more information to help them sort of decide where their focus should be. Jess, tell us, what was your reflections of that part of the process?
So this was actually super interesting because the people who actually came from the council were people that actually aren't very easy to access as just an ordinary person living in that suburb. It's not. And so the people that actually came to the meetings, the maps they supplied, the information they gave, the biggest shock was the huge cost of opening the road, which was very dramatic for the group because a lot of people, that's it, it's a done deal. Let's stop going on about this road. It's not going to happen. So it's a time waster to carry on going down this road. Let's actually use this grant and make something with it. However, for other members of the group, unfortunately, it later transpired that by ending that as a possibility, it ended their involvement really, which is sad that they weren't able to participate and maybe provide future ideas, but it is what it is. However, I think for the people who were still invested, it was so interesting to see maps of Kuranjang. People didn't even know which bits technically were part of Kuranjang, weren't part of Kuranjang, where the playgrounds, where the parks were, exactly different parts of the creek. So things like that, things about information about lighting, things about, even as strange as it sounds, information about if you were to do some lighting along a creek, how many houses overlook that creek, just things that you wouldn't ordinarily know. So it was actually a fantastic opportunity. And I think for the people who still were invested, it kind of gave a bit more energy of what potentially we could do.
Yes, thanks. Thanks very much, Jess. What about you, Lorraine? What were your reflections?
Well, I thought it was great that we actually had some of the council people there. As Jess said, these people are virtually impossible to contact, which I often thought, look, if they're representing us and they're doing this, why are they so hard to get hold of? So having them there, yep, I probably did my stalker thing again. Hi, how are you? I'm Lorraine. Who are you? What's your role? Oh, tell me about that. Oh, really? How long have you been working on the council? I wanted to find out, what could I find out about this person? And I guess I was trying to engage, how willing are you to be here? What's your role? What difference can you make? Are you actually here to be part of this, or are you just going to be, the bulldozer that stops and says, get off my turf? So it was interesting. Jess, I agree with you. It was great to get those maps, to get that perspective and to see. And I was familiar with the Little Blind Creek area because I used to walk there sometimes. Some people were, some weren't. And, when you stopped and thought about it, it had fantastic potential. And I thought it was a plus point on the part of the Director for Landscaping or whatever it was to admit that in their mapping of the town, they had missed that. And that in actual fact, in terms of the objectives of the planning for the whole town, there was a gap there that needed to be plugged. And I thought, yay, that means that they probably are actually going to do something. Now the question is what, and let's get something decent out of this if we possibly can, and how we're going to get that to happen. I did sometimes feel that the questions hit a bit of a brick wall. Yes, they'd come and yes, they'd answer, but I'd come away and think, did I come away with anything more out of that really? No. It was great that they were there. It was great to see them. But again, because, shall we say, Melton Council has not been particularly forthcoming at engaging with the community in the past, or not in a positive way, there is a great deal of suspicion. So it was good in that sense to actually see them, and then our focus really could move. Jess, you mentioned the cost of Thrice Lane. I was blown away when I started to ask some questions about the cost of the project, and I'm not sure if it was a subsequent meeting we talked about this. Okay, how much money was likely to be engaged and available, and we're all sitting there thinking, oh, we can do a lot for that, but then, like cold buckets of water thrown over everyone. What seemed to, when they explain how much things cost, and you're thinking, $1,500 for a park bench? That's ridiculous. You can get things in Bunnings for like $110. It's like, who's making money out of this? This is ridiculous. And like these prices that just seemed extraordinarily high. And the part of me that began to sort of think, well, we want to make sure it's not money for jam for the boys. We want to make sure that it's actually value for us in the community. Like there needs to be something there for the mothers, for the adolescents, and for other people who don't want to be part of those things. And let's really see if we can get the best possible bang for our buck. And maybe we need to think laterally a bit about how else, you know, my mind was starting to already drift off. But it was a bit alarming to realise how little could be achieved for the amount of money they were talking about, which at that point I think was about 250,000, wasn't it? Which sounds a lot, but basically would do very little, it would seem, based on the figures they were offering.
That's right. And so what was good at that point when we knew about what could be achieved within a certain budget envelope, you know, there was a bit of a greater understanding of kind of future proofing for a second stage or a future phase of what could be possible.
So what I've done there is I've clicked on the next video and I missed the video where the participants talk about their experience of transitioning online. So I hope you don't mind if I'm going to go back a step. The step that I've just outlined there was after we did move online, it became evident that there was a funding opportunity. And so we've unpacked that. I do want to go back and share with you a little bit of the reflections of the group when they transitioned online. Bear with me for a second.
So we got to that part of the process where we needed to generate ideas and agree on what we wanted the group to focus on. So Lorraine, what were your reflections of that part of the process?
One of the things that had been increasingly that I'd noticed and was increasingly aware of was I thought either this is a group of raging introverts or they're all too scared to say anything. And I thought, what do you do about this? This, you know, this is a challenge in a group. And I thought, well, I'm not prepared to let this opportunity go. And maybe if I start speaking, one, I can ask the questions that I want to ask. And hopefully that will prompt people maybe to then ask, or at least realise that the answer to that was useful and it might prompt them to engage more. But for quite a while, I felt like I was the only one that was asking the questions. But I thought, well, if it's what you've got to do, it's what you've got to do. This opportunity is too good to miss. So I ploughed on. But it was really interesting, though, to observe in the group that the thing that most fired people up, that most energised people, was getting the thrice lane connection through. People have been fighting for that for 25 years and being fobbed off by council all the time. They were really fed up with that and frustrated about why not, when clearly it was clear that the original plan had been for it to go through and they just stopped like 20 feet short of a middle bit. So that's where the energy was, and there wasn't too much interest in the other because it's like, yeah, we'll do that later. So trying to get people to focus on what they could do and introduce the idea that maybe that was the lane through way was going to be outside the scope, I imagine was quite tricky for you, Denise, as facilitator, given that most of the people seem to be there for that. But as we did move away and start talking about possibilities for engagement and the idea of Little Brine Creek came up, I can't remember quite.
Hi Denise, I think this is the same video as Carla has pointed out in the chat.
Myself.
Sorry, folks. I've got my videos all around the wrong way. Apologies. We'll move on to the next one. So, what happened next? So we needed to develop a project plan for the project. The group requested some advocacy to progress efforts to open up Gunnawara Road Council's landscape architect provided information on how the group could develop a vision and identify ideas for the Little Blind Creek Reserve. A teacher from Kurunjang Secondary College presented information about the students' interest in disc golf, which also proposed for the space. And Kapir helped prepare a project implementation plan for the Little Blind Creek project to get some impact for input from the group and some feedback on that. Lorraine from the group shared a visioning document for the future of the area called Thinking Big for the Kurunjang Community Project. So I'll share the next video with the reflections from the participants.
So following stage 3 restrictions, we found ourselves having to completely change our approach to meeting and getting together. Maybe I'll go to you, Jess. What were your reflections on us having to make that transition, and how did you experience that?
This was a strange time. However, I think the fact that we left off with this idea that we would maybe focus on the creek, and then lockdown happened, and for a lot of people in this community who'd maybe never walked that creek, that was their only option. So suddenly everyone started getting very interested in the creek. And the fact that we were doing these online meetings meant that for some people, it gave them the chance to actually participate. So we had people from schools, from council, who hopped on, who probably would never have come to the physical meeting. At the same time, other people completely stopped interacting. And I personally just think that maybe they had originally been in it for kind of that friendship, kind of going as a group of people who already knew each other, and then they'd be able to share their ideas together. And without that community focus, just being individual at home, it wasn't really for them. Did lose a bit in terms of kind of making friendships. I think Lorraine is much better at explaining than myself. But it was different. To facilitate us setting up the Zoom meetings, a Facebook group grew to kind of be a general place for us to post ideas and to also advertise upcoming meetings. And this actually grew in a very organic way. Slowly people were adding new members, and I guess from certain comments and little posts that people put up, you're kind of getting an idea of what some people might want out of this. So it was actually quite an interesting and strange time to suddenly go online.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Jess. What about you, Lorraine? What were your reflections of that move to online?
I was ambivalent about, I was really ambivalent about that. I just thought, oh, man. I mean, first thing that struck me was it cut across the entire ability to interact as people and to engage as people, to build trust that tends to motivate and keep groups together and keep them focused and willing to work together. And it felt like we'd all been separated out into our little pens again. And for me, that was really frustrating. It made me aware that how much of communication that I relied on was not just about what people said. It was the vibes, the feel, the interactions, the chance to talk. We had to devolve into very much a business thing with Denise directing and being, put your hand up to be allowed to speak, and waiting to be picked, which all felt a bit school marmish. But I increasingly, as we did that, I became aware that all these ideas and things that have been bubbling in my mind that had come out of the previous discussions, I desperately wanted a blackboard and a pen and to be able to get up in front of the group and talk to these ideas and show where they're connected and how they're with this, and start to build a picture so that people could see how their ideas could come together as an integrated whole, rather than having people split off like, well, I want, this is my idea and that's the only thing I want to talk about. I wanted to try and promote this idea that let's look at a way where all these ideas can be brought together so that this works for everyone, not just the vested interest of a few. And because I couldn't actually do that in that context, I ended up thinking, well, I'm not prepared. And it surprised me. This is where I got a bit stubborn about, well, I'm disengaged and I won't let this opportunity go if I do nothing else. Google to find pictures of what I was on about, because I thought, well, a picture serves 1,000 words, wrote these little pieces and I thought this can be maybe a base document that sets the seeds or the idea of people can start to think of an integrated thing rather than just single-minded. And so I pushed that out onto the Facebook page. I had to pay someone to tell me how to do that. I didn't know how to load a document on Facebook. And so I thought, yay, now I know. And I had to learn that you had to use a PDF, not a Word file, because otherwise everything's skewed. So it was learning, and that's useful. And then at least, you know, like I wasn't sure how many people actually read it, but I thought it's there, it's a resource, I've said it, and then it's something that can be referred to. And it did become very useful later, and we'll probably talk to that when you address some of the other questions further on. And it did become the first of more than one. So,
thank you. Thanks so much, Lorraine. So, Lorraine, if you wouldn't mind sharing your reflections about those meetings 5 and 6 where we found out about the funding and we get a little bit more information about what was possible.
Look, finding out about the funding thing was like oh, right, like it was a real moment of possibility. It's like suddenly there was money, there was a possibility of generating and acting on some of those ideas. And so suddenly the interest really sharpened. Again, my pencil and my brain were going zing, 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 until Anthony came and did his bit, which I'm sure Jess will talk about, where he told us how much everything cost. And there was this great sense of deflation about, oh, wow, that's really going to do it. But I switched my mind to, okay, it's going to have to be stepped process, and just started in my mind refocusing, okay, what's the biggest bang for our buck can we get with these first steps? And again, at the same time, it then triggered in my mind, okay, if this is going to have to be a staged thing to build this bigger vision, in my mind, because I'd engaged so much in creating the document, had become much more engaged in wanting to see things actually happen. But when the funding thing sort of seemed to stick a big sort of thunderbolt through the middle of that, I thought, okay, well, now we've got to think about how else we could get funding and stage it, and where else, and also if this is about community engagement, who else could we engage? How could we broaden the engagement? What other funding sources might there be that we could draw on? So I started generating another Think Big newsletter, this time about funding and the idea of partnering up. And I sort of tried to think, well, who could be? Where are the education sources? How could we? And my vision then, for me, was actually burgeoning into, this could be, you know, an area-wide thing where we start to bring in our educators and using it as a training opportunity. If we get people in, you know, maybe from the polytechs and stuff who are doing building courses, we get them to we cut the costs, but we engage them. They take ownership. Then they're part of it. They can go past with their kids and go, I built that. And so my mind was going that way. And so I produced another document, which I hope would spark that as we grappled with what couldn't be done with the amount of money that at that time was on offer.
Thanks very much, Lorraine. What about you, Jess? What were your reflections of that stage of the project?
So this was almost a roller coaster, actually, because at this point we found out how much money we could potentially get, which for people like me, I'm like, ding, 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 ding. Do we go for the diamond playground or the gold playground? And then we had Anthony, who was a gem and from council, who came and crushed our dreams by telling us how much everything in the real world costs when it's done by official contractors who the council legally have to go with. And I think everyone slowly shrunk into their seats hearing about a $20,000 basket swing or a $5,000 this, and we're thinking, oh my goodness, we're going to get nothing. But then at the same time, a little bit exciting, I guess we started having people join in who had vested interests in our project, which doesn't mean that they weren't valuable. They definitely were. And one of these members was Chris, who was a teacher at our local high school, has a huge passion for disc golf, which he's introduced to the kids there. I say kids, teens. And he's really the only one who had a strong connection with teenagers in our area. And there are heaps. So he starts educating us on this thing and then finishes it off with telling us that actually, compared to a lot of things, can be done pretty cheaply, which we're all like, wow, this is great. This might actually happen. So it was really interesting to have other people join in with their ideas. And at the same time, for us, we've now been in lockdown for a little while. And for our walks, we're obviously thinking about all these ideas. We're walking up and down the creek. A lot of people are getting a little bit passionate about it, you know, like Lorraine and her big plans. When you walk along the creek, you're starting to imagine it. So there was actually a little bit of excitement, you know, when we started going into these meetings, everyone had things to say. So it was definitely an interesting time.
So group feedback was updated on the Facebook page about the possible ideas for the Little Blind Creek, and Council's landscape architect discussed the possible options to progress, which included the disc golf. Group members shared ideas for possible involvement for lots of different groups, local groups, in particular the Melton Botanical Gardens and the Rotary Club. Kabir helped to develop an engagement plan and to collect feedback on ideas from the wider Kuranjang community. And a group member, as mentioned there, prepared a flyer to promote a survey more widely to the group. So I'll share some further reflections about what happened next.
So we'd sort of started to spur a little bit of interest in the project, and I think we got to a point where if we're going to apply for funding, then we need to get a sense of whether or not the wider community were interested in this project. What was your reflections, Jess, at this point in time in the project?
So obviously with the Zoom meetings, we had limited amount of time to do full discussions, and also, you know, though it wasn't the biggest group, it was still a group. So it's difficult to get everyone's opinions and the like in the same time frame. You know, it's hard to present them all. So it was quite interesting because at this point we'd discussed about how, you know, some of us had ideas that we weren't able to maybe verbalise. It'd be a great idea if we could put a post on the Facebook group, and then maybe people could start popping in some pictures and the like. You know, we already had Lorraine's document, which was great, but it just meant that we could kind of go to town, I guess, with what we'd like, and it maybe become a bit clearer. So it was great that on the Facebook site, we were maybe hearing from people who were less vocal on the Zoom chats, which was great. So there was that aspect, but then at the same time, some of the other members were super proactive and reaching out to places like the Melton Botanical Garden for advice on planting, Western Water, who advised us that any planting would be watered for free. And I guess it just opened up things that you didn't really know existed until you ask, but you didn't even know who to ask in the first place. So there was a lot of interesting things going on in that period.
Lorraine, what were your reflections at that time?
Well, I thought, like Jess, I thought it was really, really great to see people getting more engaged and actually thinking, yes, we can do something, getting involved, starting to think about it. When I saw, I think it was Jorina had contacted Melton Botanical Gardens and then who had contacted the Western Water, I thought, yes, this is what we want. We want people engaged, people taking initiative and then bringing things back to the group instead of just like the consultants doing it or one or two of us doing it. It was starting to spread, and I thought, yeah, that's what you want. You're getting engagement from others. Other people are starting to source things, and we're getting access to a wider group of ideas and people than we might otherwise know. And as you said, Jess, suddenly we knew about opportunities we had no reason to know about before. And so it started to spark that idea of possibility, that there would be other ones as well. When the idea of going out to the survey came up, you know, I was probably a little bit ambivalent in the sense of, well, there's been no interest from them in the first place. Most people will probably throw them out. God, this process is taking forever. Are we getting too caught up in the process? You know, like, are we actually going to do something? And I just thought, well, it is what it is, you know. So I just thought, well, it'll be interesting to see whether we get a response. I mean, we didn't know what was an adequate response or whatever till you spoke about it later. What I thought was, well, that wasn't much of a response. You said, that was fantastic. Wow. And I thought, really? Really? So again, we're getting a bit of reality testing on our side about what engagement means. You know, so if more than 10 people reply, wow. You know, if more than 100 reply, you think, wow, that really worked. So again, we're learning at the same time because we don't have the background of other projects. This is where Kapia comes in and the consultants who've worked in other areas. And I think it's important you're in the opportunity then to give us a bit of reality testing about, like, it seemed on the surface to be a poor response until you put it in the context of others. And then you think, actually, it was a really great response.
And it was interesting, wasn't it, to hear from council at that point in time that when they put out surveys of this nature that they don't get many responses at all.
Yes.
And I was surprised by that myself as well.
Well, it also, I think, justified perhaps the state government initial interest that you get more engagement and participation if you start it from the community and actually allow people to engage and move up the chain rather than letting the people at the top make the decisions and just drop it down. And it was, you know, like that actually also, I could see it as a possibility of allowing council perhaps to have a little more confidence in its community members, that there are people out there who genuinely want to engage, who actually have something to offer and want to work in partnership, and not only want to but can, and that there might be something really fruitful in terms of cross-fertilisation of ideas. And so they can teach us about their constraints and we can teach them more about our dreams. And perhaps between the two of us, we can come up with a much greater possibility that has ramifications not just within Little Byne Creek, but can start to infiltrate as a process, which is more your role, Denise, as a consultant, in terms of applying to other projects. And I've always thought in groups, when you get people who can merge and have come from different perspectives, different resources, you get a much better outcome in the end, and each learns from the other. And I think that's a real growth opportunity, both for us, for council, and maybe even the state. So yeah, it was worthwhile, even though I just thought, oh God, okay, now we're doing surveys. How long is this ever going to finish?
So the group invited Neighbourhood Watch to share information about their work and how they could support the group. A group member also reported back on partnership opportunities that were available with some of the groups that had shown a bit of interest, in particular Melton Botanical Gardens and Western Water. The group worked with Kapia and Council to design a survey, which was described by the participants, and they prepared an illustrative map of the area, which was highlighting the ideas that came up from the group, which included a few of the things you see up on your screen now. And I'll share some of the reflections from the participants at this stage of the process.
We needed to get our ideas that we've been discussing onto paper, develop a plan. We drafted a survey. What were your reflections on the survey? Maybe I'll go to you, Jess.
So the survey was really, look, we were unsure how many people would ever fill out a survey. but we needed to ask, because if you don't ask, then people can get very unhappy when stuff happens and say, well, we weren't consulted. So this was the opportunity to let everyone know in our area that there was some chances of getting some things to benefit us. And the idea was that we were going to give everyone the opportunity with a letterbox drop and also social media promoting it. So really, everyone would have the opportunity. I think what was always in the back of my mind, and I'm sure a couple of others, is that though we had this core group of people who were always at the meetings, I never felt like the people who were there represented Kuranjang. Okay, Kuranjang has not got a high income. Kuranjang has a lot of people who has English not as their first language. You know, a lot of recent immigrants. There's a lot of people, and I phrase this really badly, on the lower end of social mobility, okay? And these people were never evident in our process. They've never popped up on the Facebook site. They've never popped into a meeting. And so I think apart from anything, it was like, well, you know what? We're going to do this survey. Hopefully some of these people, if they have opinions, this is the opportunity for them to give it. Because even though these are our ideas, what if we're not giving people what they actually want? What if we're talking about different things entirely? So then we came up with this survey, and the questions were great. The survey itself, like the blurb that goes with this is the survey, if I wasn't part of the group, would have gone right over my head. I promoted this survey quite extensively on social media because I am a mum on Facebook, and I would put in my shared post, hi guys, anyone in Kuranjang who wants to put a few ideas and select a few things that we're probably going to get because we've got some funding, click through and do this survey. Because I knew just sharing the survey, it would go over people's heads. So it was something that we were all excited about, but I definitely had a lot of reservations on it.
So towards the end of the project, a representative from Rotary shared a proposal with the group regarding possible inclusion of a drinking fountain funded by the Rotary in the Little Blind Creek Reserve, and to include a plaque that recognised a Rotary member's community contribution to Rotary. An assistant director from the state government provided information about an alternate funding opportunity for the group to apply for project funding. Council agreed to build on the work of the group, and they drafted a grant submission asking for a member of the group to also provide a letter of support on behalf of the group. There's a bit of a quote there up on the slide that came from the letter that was prepared by Lorraine, the participant. The survey findings from the engagement with the broader community on the Little Blind Creek was presented back to the group. And as indicated before, there were quite a few more people who participated in this survey that council had been able to get people to participate previously. I'll share the last video. Hopefully you've been able to stick with us till the end. I'll share that last video now.
Okay, so we got to the sort of end of the project, and we find out from the department that we have to put in a funding application for a grant to get support for this project. Do you want to share your reflections, Jess, at this point in time of the project?
Well, this was quite exciting for us because it became clear at this point that we had the opportunity to get a little bit more money than we had anticipated. And so, especially with the findings of our survey, where it had showed all these great ideas, and initially we'd thought, well, with this much money, we can have this many things. And then, you know, hearing that we had maybe this much money, we thought, oh my goodness, we could do all these extra things, which was just really exciting. And then at the same time, we had a gentleman from the Rotary Club who popped into one of our meetings. He'd been to a couple of meetings and said he'd get back to us after discussing it with the Rotary Club. And then he delivered the news that there was potentially the opportunity for a drinking fountain in the name of one of their members. And this is huge for us. I mean, a drinking fountain doesn't sound exciting, but when you go for a long walk or you go to the playground and there is nothing, a drinking fountain's pretty cool. So it got really exciting at this point. You know, everything was kind of coming together and you could kind of envisage all of these huge changes along the creek.
Thanks very much, Jess. What about you, Lorraine?
Look, when I saw other people starting to come in, particularly when I think it was Barry on, and he said he would give us, you know, one of those water fountains that feed people and dogs. I just thought, this is a great example of when you get your vision and you spread out there and you spread the word, other things come, and we are engaging beyond our own community already. And isn't that fantastic that Rotary has now already noticed us and are willing to support us and do something proactive? I thought that's actually what you want with community engagement, isn't it? And then we have a reason to notice Rotary, and then maybe a few people decide to go. And so there was a bit of that mutuality already coming in, and I was thinking, yes, you know, this is really good. And if this is on top of it, and then the news that we could, as Jess said, perhaps have access to a greater funding pool. Well, yeah, this is great. You know, see how things work, synchronicity, whatever the cause, it's actually starting to pull together. And then when on top of that, they said that council would actually do the bulk of the application, I thought, good on them. You know, like actually now they're working with us. They've got the resources. They know how to do those things. They've got the contact. Be good if we were a bit closer and part of it, but it's fantastic that they're going to pick up that hard part because it might overwhelm a small group with such, you know, diverse skills as we had. So I saw that as a real sign that they were actually willing to work along with us. And so when I think then there was the call for, I think Jade said it would really enhance the application if, as a group, one of us or the group would do a leader in support. And so I thought, right, that's actually really important. So I shot my hand up because I'd been doing those other things. I thought, I know I can put something like that together. I was anticipating that they'd already have done it before and have models. So I thought, well, I'll ring up Jade and she can send me the sort of thing they do so I know what to write. So I think we were both a bit taken aback when I did that. And then she came back to me and she said, look, strange, I know, but we don't have any. We don't have anything here of what's been done before. And so I thought, oh, right. So I've got to just create this out of thin air myself. So flicked her another email, said, what sort of things do you think it needs to cover? She sent me back a few pointers, and so I went for it. I was surprised I actually produced quite a lengthy thing, and I was thinking, God, I hope that's not too long. But it was, I just felt that we as a group were saying, look, we're prepared to do our part to support you. You're supporting us by doing the thing. Look, we're just stepping up. We're showing you that we will step up. We will work with you. We will support you because we appreciate that you are trying to do something that will support us. And I thought that was a really important part of the process. And so they could have some confidence that if they did engage with groups, that we would support them as well instead of just leaving it all in their corner. So I flicked it up onto the Facebook page so people could read it, make any comments. There were a few comments came back. I made some minor arrangements and then sent it off to Jade, who seemed pretty happy. You know, said, oh, this will be fantastic. This is great. Right. And so then it was sort of like a done deal. It became then a waiting game for all of us in terms of, well, hopefully we've done what we can. Hopefully council, given what they know, have done what they can. And now we wait, and we are still waiting. But hopefully, you know, we will get a good income and it will all come together.
And what a great letter it was. Thanks so much, Lorraine. And thank you to you both for your honesty and your honest, frank reflections about the process.
So thanks very much, everybody, for sticking with me a little bit over time. I wanted to let the participants, share their reflections on their journey through this project. If you are able to stick around, there's a couple of principles I would like to share for how future community-led approaches could be framed. Look, the community will define their own level of engagement with the project. There are passionate people in the community, and with guidance and support, they can be leaders to promote community-led public safety measures that benefit the broader community. For community-led public safety measures to be effective, they must be relevant to the wider community and not just members of the group. To gain and maintain interest of the project, the community should define the objectives and align projects that the group would like to deliver. Transparency and responsiveness will build confidence in community groups to develop partnerships with government and other agencies. For the community to design relevant and localised public safety measures, they need to be informed of the role of the different approaches to public safety and the appropriateness for their context. By providing the community with information about approval processes and possible opportunities, they can make informed decisions about public safety that are appropriate for their context. Connection to community in its own right is a benefit of this approach, to link up more isolated members of the community to other people and to local services. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, and keep safe, keep well.